There are two types of people during a recession, those that crumble and those that come out on top. There are some simple things that you can avoid doing and some things that you can make sure you do so that you leave a recession in a better financial state than you entered it in. Is a recession actually coming? A true recession is defined by 2 consecutive quarters of falling GDP, gross domestic product. It's a time when there is significant decline in economic activity spanning across many months. In everyday terms, this means less sales, which then means less production and manufacturing, which means less employment, and so income falls. And then people spend less as a result of this, and it all has a knock-on effect. Whether we might soon be entering a recession is up for debate. Sure, there are signs that one is coming. Falling stock markets, increasing inflation, interest rates going weird, and soaring gas prices. But there are also factors indicating that one is not coming, such as a decrease in unemployment rate. Also, given that the last recession we saw, granted a very small one, was only in 2020, economists are hesitant to say that we'll see another one anytime soon. Regardless of if and when one does come, it's really important to know how best to position yourself so that you can benefit from it, given how scary and uncertain they can be. For some people, a recession will mean losing their jobs, seeing a decrease or a loss entirely of their income, losing their homes, seeing companies around them going bust. But for others, it's a chance to make their wealth, but of course, only if you're prepared. So with all that said, let's talk about some things that you should do and some mistakes that you should avoid making. The first thing you should do is focus on paying off debt, like that on a credit card, because interest rates can really rise during a recession. Specifically, concentrate on paying off the high interest debt that you may have. The next thing to do is to keep investing into assets and not to sell out of any of your positions unless you absolutely have to. But if you follow the other tips that I'm going to share in this video that we'll get onto in a minute, you shouldn't need to cash out of any of your positions anyway. It's understandable to think that you really need cash during these sort of economic times, and therefore you'll sell out of all of your positions. But in order for this to work and you not to sell out at a loss, you need to time the market right twice, which is really tough. You first have to sell when the market is at a high compared to the market bottom. But then you have to identify a point in which you'll re-enter the market in order to participate in the market recovery. If you just sell as the market falls and you don't manage to time it very well at all, then you're just going to be selling at a loss, which is not going to help yourself financially in the future. But the caveat here is, of course, that if you have no other option but to sell your investments in order to feed and home your family, then of course you have no other choice. We'll touch on this a little bit more later on in the video, but if you're buying high quality companies or you're purchasing ETFs and index funds that are tracking indices, then you should just keep buying because technically they're at a discount. As Warren Buffett famously put it, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. The next thing is to have an emergency fund. This is a collection of savings that you have that are easily accessible to you, meaning they're not tied up in an asset in case for whatever reason something happens and you lose your job. And typically your emergency fund would be a bit larger than it would be in normal economic times. This is obviously subjective, but maybe about 12 months worth of living expenses. I think it's a good idea to track your income and your spending, thus your net worth, and highlight any areas where you can actually cut back on your spending in order to increase your savings and add to your emergency fund. And finally, for things that you should do, consider a second income stream. One of the biggest risks of a recession is actually losing your job, but you could protect your income somewhat by adding new sources to it. For example, you could start a side hustle, and I really hate this phrase, but it helps to decrease your dependency on your day job. Now onto things that you shouldn't do. 1. Make risky investments. Focus on companies that have a strong balance sheet, strong cash flow, and non-cyclical companies that people will really need and still want during economic downfall. Healthcare and consumer staple companies tend to do well even in a recession because they provide things that people need. The easiest way to decide which companies are non-cyclical ones is probably just to Google it. But the second best way is to put yourself into the mind of a consumer, which is not difficult considering we are all consumers. If you were struggling financially, would you choose to spend the money that you did have on things like food and healthcare, or would you instead use that money to buy new cars and treating yourself to fancy restaurant outings. The next mistake people make during a recession is to be scared of a bear market and then because of this stop investing. As long as you can cover all of your basics and essentials like food and shelter, then you should still invest. The market will fall, but it will also rise to new all-time highs at some point, and getting in whilst it's at a low is a good thing. The historical data shows us that stocks recover following a recession. Stock markets usually fall in the 6 months leading up to a recession and during one, but the S&P 500 has averaged a 16% return in the 12 months following recessions. Economic downturns do not last indefinitely, and as long as you have a long-term plan and mindset, you should be able to benefit from the market recovery. Just shift your view a little bit and look at this from the point of a long-term investor. If the psychology of it all gets to you too much, then just don't look and instead dollar cost average in. This just means investing the same amount at set periods regardless of if the market is up or if it's down. This next one goes hand in hand with the last, and it's this idea of trying, easier said than done I know, not to overthink and instead to rationalize. When you're experiencing a market crash, it's really easy to think that this time is really different and the market will never recover, and this will truly be the end of the economy, and this really isn't helped by the media either. Instead, try and focus yourself and look at some past data and actually see what's happened during and following a recession. And finally, don't try to time the market. When stocks are dropping, you may be someone that is actually able to control your emotions and not sell out of your positions, as we spoke about earlier, but you may be someone that gets the urge to try and time the bottom of the market for the ultimate bargains and returns. The long and short of it is that this is really hard to do and often just not worth the stress. Check out this video up here where I talk about this point in way more detail and show you some statistics and some research into this. Although I'm not anti buying in when the prices are good, I do think there is a difference between this general mindset and trying very, very hard to time the exact bottom. Being worried about recessions is normal, but being prepared with some things that you should do and some mistakes that you should avoid making will help you and your financial future.